Hello, how are you doing? So this week's video is a little bit different to normal. I'm doing it on my mobile because I'm going to be doing some little exercise demonstrations as well. So today it's all about a different way to think about exercise, okay? And sort of, I guess, some of the common exercise associations that we have are it's about burning calories or getting big muscles or getting toned up. It's about cardio endurance, all of that's true. We equate it with exercise, with having to do something that can feel quite hard or unpleasant, being out of breath, getting that pain in your muscles. But this way of looking at it is going to just sort of take it a step away from that. And what I want to talk about, I should say, is about how we can very often think less about the smaller muscles that work really hard in the body, not just to move us, or not actually, their primary job isn't to move us, but to stabilize us, support our posture, keep our joints balanced and aligned when we are moving. And these are little muscles that don't get much attention, but actually do need more attention now. And this is something I've learned the hard way. It's not actually really taught in strength training, as a qualification, because it tends to focus on the big exercises and the type of things that I'd already talked about. But the reasons these need more attention now, as we get to this, I still can't say it without laughing, this older age, it's really about knowing and being aware about how our bodies change. And when we think about strength training, we do it because we know that our muscles get weaker and we lose power. But in terms of these smaller muscles, what's happening is we lose what's called our sense of proprioception and finer motor skills. So proprioception is really a sense of understanding where our body is in space, and that sort of instinct on where we are. That starts to become less sensitive, and that goes hand in hand with our motor skills. You remember when you came back from school after 6 weeks holidays, and it was very hard to write and hold your pen properly because you'd not been sort of using those muscles. Well, it's the same. If you think about our bodies as we walk or run or walk uphill, go take a load of stuff upstairs, we are actually responding to the environment that we're in, the instability in the pavements or the terrain that we're working on, or the loads that we're carrying. And these little tiny muscles are the ones that are actually responding to that to keep us stabilized and balanced. And so we lose that ability to sort of fine tune that. So we can start to feel a little bit clumsier, a little bit less agile. This is one of the reasons where our balance can start to change. And this is something that is just a phenomenon of age. Now, the good news with all of these things is that because when we become aware of it, we can address it. And everything like this responds to training. Your body responds to training, and that's a fantastic asset that we all have access to. So that's one of the big things that's happening, which is an age-related process. I was going to say decline, but I'll put a positive spin on it. But then another thing that's changing, which is not really about age, it's really about time, and the fact that we spend a lot of time in our lives sat in seated positions, as I am now. And we don't move as much during the day because we are, doing our jobs, doing our chores, and sitting down, driving, all those sorts of things, rather than actually doing a very big and wide variety of different movements. So what that creates is muscle imbalances. And a real classic one is that these muscles here can come quite short and tight. So it sort of pulls our shoulders round because we're always doing this, or washing up, and all those things that we do are in front of us, and we can sort of we can almost end up curling inwards. And this means that if these muscles are tight here, the muscles behind us start to become weaker and what's called inhibited. So these are because muscles work in pairs, and if these are sort of overactive because they're tightened and shorter, well, these we just sort of lose our control over them, and they don't work as well. And if you think about walking down the street, if you had really good posture with your shoulders down and back and your chest out, it probably feels quite unnatural to us now, because we really do feel like we're almost arching our back and taking some ridiculous stance, because we've just normalised what it feels like to be hunched forward. So And that's this idea of this proprioception changing. We're not as clear of where our body is in space, so it starts to feel alien to us a little bit, but the way our day-to-day lives have us moving means that it's almost contorting us into a different posture. So, and because muscles, you know this already, have a use it or lose it policy, if we're using some muscles all the time and not using others as much as we should do, these will get stronger and these will get weaker on a continuum. So we have this gradual worsening of the situation over time. Now, what I said at the beginning was that the good news, it's so full of good news this, isn't it? I feel like I'm good at putting positive spins on things. But with these issues that we're talking about, hard exercise isn't always what we need. So that's the good news. But what we do need is regular repetition, all right? So rewiring our body, rewiring these little muscles and getting connected to them again and getting them doing their jobs, and also us reconnecting with what the right position for our body should be in, okay? And a good way to do that is with movement snacks throughout the day. So, you know, it might be when you're boiling the kettle or cleaning your teeth or doing little chores. There are little things where you might take a break in your day and you can do some of the exercises that I'm going to show you just to reconnect you with some of these smaller muscles in your body and also these essential functions. And this can be really useful, just these little things that won't make you out of breath, that won't make you ache, but actually will really re-educate your body in how it moves. So there's, and how I like to think of it, I'm looking at my notes here, it just reminded me, is how we activate and reconnect to our body or to these muscles to improve our control of how we move. So I'm going to give you just a few little exercises that you can do throughout the day that's going to address some of these areas, okay? And they're easy to do. Just going to take a couple of minutes, but if you do really get into the habit of doing these, they will make a big difference, okay? Right, so our first one is a posture check, okay? So I know you probably know about sort of shoulders back, standing upright, but the things that that are really useful here to think about your posture is this opening up of the chest, okay? And I'm just going to sort of turn to the side here, because the key thing to understand with the posture is your pelvic tilt, okay? And it's very common for us to either sort of hunch forward and roll like this. So everyone's different in terms of what their pattern will be. It would be to roll forward like that, or you stick your tummy out and your bottom out, which rolls your pelvis out, which means that you've got a greater scoop or a greater arch in your back. So something that you can do from a posture point of view is you take your fingers on your top of your ribs, or your thumb, and then your finger at the top of your hips. And you want to sort of just get a sense of squeezing them very slightly together so that this just sort of almost very gently sort of pulled in. But what you're imagining here is that if you had a line going through your hips, that the action of doing that just brings your hips into alignment, okay? And that's what you want to hold on to. And imagine then that you've got two bars fixing your ribs and your hips together so this doesn't move. And then it's about opening your shoulders and bringing your shoulders back and seeing what that feels like. Now, when you're in this position, another way of being able to tell if you have got that right is thinking about where you feel the weight through your feet. So when you found that neutral spine position and your pelvis is aligned and you're in this sort of good posture position, the balance will be going through the middle of your feet, okay? If you are more in this position, you'll feel it into your heels. If you're in a sort of a position where your hips are sticking out and your bum's sticking out and your tummy's sticking forward, then you might feel it more on your feet. Whereas when you bring everything into alignment, there's a little shift in where you feel the weight going through your feet, and you'll feel it going through the middle, and you'll feel balanced on each side. So that's quite a good thing to do throughout the day, is just to regularly check in and see what your posture's like. So times I might do this might be if I'm if I was boiling the kettle or cleaning my teeth, and I might just bring my hand onto my core just to sort of, as a little cue to sort of feel that get into alignment. That's also a posture you should be using when you're walking or running, we still should be in this, starting from this good point of posture. But I might do it if I was queuing up somewhere as well, you know, just little times in the day where you can check in. But this is a really useful cue, this one around your stomach, because if you were in a position where you were doing any core exercises, you want to be keeping this really engaged as well. Okay. Another way to sort of test this as well, or progress this, is engaging your core, get into that posture, and then kicking back as if you were, you know, when you walk or run, and actually learning how to maintain this core position when your body's moving. And again, that might be something that I would do when I was boiling the kettle or something. And in doing that, you should feel your glutes and you should feel your hamstrings. It's actually quite common when you're doing that to kick forward and to, can you see my body? Sort of almost stomach stretches and you go into an arch. And that's really when I'm not able to make that connection and I'm losing that control of my posture here when I'm kicking back, and therefore I'm almost arching my back to move my leg back rather than maintaining the core and using your glutes and your hamstrings to move your body back, which is what it should be doing. So another exercise is a balance exercise, and you're going to make it a little bit harder with the ball. So obviously everyone would recognise that you might just stand on one leg when you clean your teeth, or you're doing, you know, a little, you know, boiling the kettle or something like that. And what I would encourage when you do that is to not just do it mindlessly and stand on one leg, but actually think about how good your sort of hip strength is and how good your balance is on each side of your body, because you'll have a stronger side and a weaker side. I'm on my stronger side right now, so I find that very easy. I could stand there all day. This side's a different matter, but also I would be more likely to collapse into my hip on my weak side and balance like that, rather than coming out strong through the joint, which is what I do on the other one. So compare what you like on your left and right, and notice as much as you can on the stronger side, and then try and mimic that feeling by tweaking your posture and your position on the weaker side. Okay, you're not going to fully ever iron out weaknesses in terms of left to right, but the more you can become aware of how things are different and try and match in when you're doing these types of exercise where you have some control, then the better. So the fact that I'm able to stand on this leg well probably means that my hip stabilisers are stronger, and the fact that I notice that when I'm on this side I collapse into my hip means my hip stabilisers are weaker. So it just is good information for me that I can use to actually engage those muscles and make them work a little bit harder on that weaker side. And then just to challenge you a little bit, you can get a little ball or something, whatever you've got in the kitchen that you don't mind throwing up and down, but that just makes things work a little bit harder. And as I'm doing that, I can almost feel my foot rocking a little bit, and what that's doing is activating lots of the little tiny sort of intrinsic muscles in your feet and starting to build some improved foot and ankle strength there. But also, if you're aware of your hip and engaging your hip and the posture that you're holding through there, it's also going to be strengthening out some of those small muscles in your hip as well, so that you're stabilising that joint more effectively. So a really nice little exercise just to do throughout the day. Another quite useful hip exercise is to because your hips, you know, it's easy to think about when we're walking front to back, so we think about this, and then that's obvious as well that your hip might move side to side, but our hips actually rotate. So I don't know if you can see my knees rolling in and rolling out. So almost that's where I'm starting the movement to get that feeling. But then I'm actually, as I roll them out, I'm feeling these little muscles into my sort of almost like the top of my thigh, into the back of my hip, engaging. So you would turn your knees out and feel it there, okay? So I don't know if you can almost see my body sort of pulling in as I'm twisting my knees out, engaging it and then relaxing. Twisting out, engaging and relaxing. So that again is a very handy little exercise that you could just do when you stood around, and that's just really working on these little rotating muscles in your hip that are very useful for stabilising you. Anytime you walk, run, walk upstairs, there'll be a time when you are on one leg, And that's what these exercises are doing. They're helping to get you more balanced and stronger for those many, many times a day where you're just putting all your weight through one leg. My last hip exercise, which again you can do when you're, anytime you're sort of standing around, and that would be deliberate sinking through the hip and then lifting up. And the muscle that we're working here is where my finger is pointing to. It looks like I'm using this side of my body to push up, but actually I'm really trying to isolate the hip here, the movement that's letting my sort of hip stick out here with control, and then push in, okay? Now you can do these holding on to something if your balance isn't great, but that again, that's a really good exercise to really sort of to get into the hip and strengthen the muscles around the hip joint. My last little movement snack, and my last but one, you do need something for this that's elastic. And again, in the same way that when I was just talking about your hips rotating, your arms, your shoulders rotate. And the way we would access that movement is by having your palms up, elbows into the side, and pulling out so your shoulders squeeze back into the sockets. So you'll feel this right in the back of your shoulders. Now, again, this is a really important exercise. The percentage of older adults that will actually have shoulder rotator cuff tears is really high. It's something like 70%. And this exercise targets that rotator cuff. Now, you can do it without a band, because as you get your hands out here, that you will feel some resistance. So you can get a good squeeze into the back. But if you do have a little band, and you can buy these just for next to nothing online, you can just use that little bit of resistance to pull in and out. Okay. So really, really simple. And these are all tiny muscles, so they don't take huge amounts of weights and huge amount of effort. So the things that I'm giving you here will be just enough, just enough to actually start to make a difference. And then my last one, and you can do this when you sat down actually, would be, and you can lean your, I've not got anything to sit on, but you could lean your hand against the back of a chair and you're rotating your shoulder that way. So again, it's just not something, it's hitting or targeting very important muscles in the shoulder that stabilize you. But you would never have to do this movement in your day. If you do, let me know, because I have no idea what it would be. And that can really start to work and move those little muscles that rotate your shoulder. So that's something a bit different this week to my usual coaching videos, but we've gone into, over the past few weeks, quite a lot of detail about different things around goals and around habits, and what you can do to set yourself up for success. So I really did want to talk about some little easy things that we can do just to strengthen those very easy to forget but very important little muscles in our body. So I hope you enjoyed that for a change. I look forward to catching up with you all very soon. All right, bye for now.